Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking your seats again after that great conversation with the governor. We're very excited to be here at Climate Tech. I've always wanted to be on the stage, maybe singing, not doing this, but here at MGM, but that's a different life that I haven't lived. I first want to start out by thanking the governor and also Secretary Howe and Mayor Wu for their support of this amazing conference. Also, all the organizers who have pulled this off in really record time. I think you'd all agree this has just already been a great day. We had a wonderful evening last night at Fenway. So again, thank you to all the organizers who've been involved. We are really excited to be here. I'm representing State Street. I've got two great panelists I'll introduce in a moment. But very excited to be here because the vision that the governor just laid out for all of you really starts at home here in Boston, but it's a global vision for investing in climate technology that will make a difference around the globe. And as a company that has had its home in Massachusetts for well over 200 years, we really have our home here, but we have our clients and the people they serve also, distributed all over the globe. And the types of innovation and technology that can be created through the efforts that are going on here in Massachusetts can really have impact in a much broader way, as we have with biotech, as you heard about in the previous panel. So today we want to talk about in this panel exactly how do we get some of that funding flowing from some of the institutions around the globe that both Viviane and Amy are here to kind of represent. And I do think that Viviane may get the award for the furthest to travel because she is joining us from Brazil.
Yeah, the carbon footprint was not good.
Yeah, we're really excited to have her here. But this, the inspiration, again, the $1 trillion, $1 billion that the governor has talked about investing here in Massachusetts, the over $1 trillion that has been invested in the United States, that money is amplified by other nations. It's certainly amplified by other institutions. And we're going to talk to you about how different groups are trying to really increase that scale and the flow of investment to new technologies to really make that difference in climate transition and adaptation. So I have with me today Viviane Tornelli, who is a specialist dedicated to the development of transversal intelligence for sustainability at the Central Bank of Brazil. She's a member of the jury of G20 TechSprint, a member of the executive committee of BCB Lift Lab 2324, and a member of the organizing team of the G20 TechSprint 2024, which she's going to tell you a little bit about. We also have Amy Hepburn, who's just to my left. She's the CEO of the Investor Leadership Network, and she's charged with designing and delivering a long-term strategy of the ILN, representing the network in collaboration with its stakeholders, which are some of the biggest pension funds in the world. And she's going to tell you about their focus area. So we're areas, actually. So we're going to start out with Viviane giving us a few introductory comments. So Viviane, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. It's a huge pleasure and an honor to be here in such a qualified audience. To come from Brazil and to speak in Boston about climate and technology is something special. Thank you for that. It's important to say that coming from the global south, we are facing there similar problems we are facing here, specifically related to the extreme weather events. We are suffering with extreme droughts, with heavy rains, with floodings, and we have impacts on food. We have impacts on energy matrix because, for example, for us, we have cascade micro and macroeconomic impacts in costs, prices, inflation. We measured that, we published that for example, the drought of 2021. And so we understand that this is an agenda that is common and is relevant, and we need to mobilize resources for this. Besides these physical climate events, for sure, since we all are aware of this relevance, regulations are changing, policy makers are taking different decisions, investors have different awareness. The consumption market is changing, so we have transition risks, isn't it? So for sure, I think thank you for the invitation, but what we understand is that this agenda of physical and climate risks, it's relevant, that the capital has to flow to the solutions of adaptation, mitigation, and reduction of the emissions. And for example, the technology and the innovative technology has a huge role to scale up this, not only in the real world projects, but also in financial instruments and in financial infrastructure. So this, I think, it would be in a nutshell my introductory remarks.
Thank you, Viviane. And Amy.
Yes, thanks, Viviane and Jess, for having me on this panel and to be in this room. It is truly both a pleasure and an honor to have this conversation today. So maybe I'll start by giving you a few a little background understanding on the Investor Leadership Network. It was founded during the 2018 G7 under Canada's leadership. At that time, some of the key Canadian pension funds came together and said, how do we support the values of the G7 at that time? What started as really a couple of key institutional investors quickly steamrolled into a G7 Plus initiative. We now have 14 institutional investors across the G7 Plus, including Australia and others, asset owners and asset managers. We represent over 10 trillion assets under management worldwide, invested across every asset class and every market. There's three areas where we're really driving, our call to action is around a sustainable and inclusive global economy. How do we work together to get there? And we focus on three areas to do it. One is on climate. The other is on diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at the market. How do we as organizations, as well as how are we influencing the industry writ large? And the third is on private capital mobilization in both developing and developed markets. So what we're talking about today around tech and innovation is at the heart of what we are discussing at the ILN. I should also say the ILN is a CEO-led network, so it's at the highest levels of influence with these institutional investors. They're really driving action and they're really driving commitments. And I always say, KPI-driven work to show that we're making progress across our three work streams. So climate, tech, innovation, how do we plug into that continuum of finance and really scale the best ideas in both emerging markets and developed markets is central to the conversations we're having on a daily basis. And so, I'll pause there.
Okay, wonderful, Amy. Thank you. It's a really great organization we've been privileged to be a part of. I want to talk to you, Viviane, about the funding of projects and how we make sure that the right sorts of investments are happening to get to the transition, the right technologies are being funded. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you think about that, particularly around the G20 TechSprint. And Amy and I had the privilege of being in DC, I think it was last week, when the Treasury actually announced some of its commitment around voluntary carbon markets. But a part of that discussion, too, was our own Department of Energy here or in Department of Agriculture, also doing contests and looking at different project funding. So how are you looking at project funding? And again, tell us maybe a little bit about the G20 TechSprint.
Yes, for sure. I think one point for us when shifting this discussion from traditional finance to sustainable finance and trying to look to this project in a different dimension, I think it's important to have in mind that we have something besides the risk and return graph, yes, in the axis. We have a cube, and we have a third dimension that must be maybe the most important. So what is this money making in the real world? So besides risk and return, financial risk and return. So which are, for example, the sustainable development goals that are being tackled? What is the impact in the climate discussion, in the nature-based solutions, biodiversity preservation? So this linking to the G20 TechSprint, it's what we are trying to, in this first moment, raise awareness and try to also give some stimulus to this joint effort of the startups and minds and governments to drive the innovative technology to foster, scale up investments, and facilitate the increase of the capital flow towards this agenda. So we see some challenges for that, and that's why we have 3 problem statements. The first problem statement is is focused on nature-based solutions. So innovative technology using blockchain, IoT, machine learning, sensors, everything, to address nature-based solutions, considering that this is one of the most important way to change the logic of the economy for a low-carbon economy and with a broader advantages for the society. The second problem statement is more focused in ESG data. So HegTechs, SupTechs, I was talking in the State Street breakfast with a colleague from the G20 Venture Capital, and he was talking about some initiatives they already have in that. So to use the innovative technology to collect data, to aggregate data, to analyze, to give traceability, to help on these challenges, and also the RegTech and SupTech, how to also help on monitoring the adequacy to regulations, how to see the compliancy of these projects to the regulations in place. So how the innovative technology can help on that. And the third problem statement is more broad, is more dedicated to open source solutions, focused on SDGs. Specifically in the third problem statement, we are trying to incentivize also solutions towards financial inclusion and education, understanding that these are really important enablers to achieving sustainable development goals, mainly in the global south, since we have higher challenges in this regard. So thank you for the space, but it's just to let you know that the submissions are open for this global hackathon up to June 14. It's an initiative of G20 economies with the Central Bank of Brazil in the presidency, but the BIS Innovation Hub in Hong Kong is already in the 5th edition, so it's every year there is this global hackathon, and it will be an event in the end of the year in Brazil with the presidents of BIS, IDB, the International Development Bank, who is sponsoring this initiative, and also the Central Bank of Brazil. But the main benefits maybe for the minds and startups here, it's the reputational side also of this initiative, of the report of the BIS and so on.
So I just want you all to know that the deadline was meant to be yesterday?
It was May 31st, but we couldn't ignore that you are really able to submit incredible solutions. So they decided to postpone up to June 14th, so Boston could make the difference.
That's right. So you all have a call to action because they actually changed the final date of submission to make sure this conference, people at this conference had an opportunity to get involved if they wanted to, which is just fantastic. So thank you for that. Amy, you know that in talking to all the pension funds particularly that you work with, and they are really global, and they are investing everywhere, right? But they think a lot about how to increase the scale of investment, and they really do hit challenges. So maybe you could talk about who you're serving with ILN, but some of the challenges that you've been working on in the climate and blended finance space.
Yeah, absolutely. And first I would say this TechSprint is so exciting. And one of the reasons I love it and listening to you speak about it is, and it builds on the governor's comments too, around focusing on the opportunity. There is a lot of attention around the risks, and rightly so. But from an investment perspective, and one thing we really work hard on at ILN is also highlighting what are the opportunities, the investment opportunities in this space, and they are enormous. And innovation and technology is what is driving that. And so that is not lost on the largest global investors for sure. So maybe start by saying that we absolutely recognize that this is a decisive decade for climate action. All of the investors that we work with at ILN, I think it is It is the sense of urgency and time and opportunity for technology, but also the role that large capital plays to scale is very much central to the conversation. So what are some of the challenges in doing so? And this is something we've been working a lot on at ILN, and I can really sort of concisely try to bucket it into 4 areas. One, I would say, building on your comment on data. Data is central to this conversation, particularly as investors who are making evidence-based decisions. We understand that there is an absolute difference between real and perceived risk, actual and perceived risk. But the only way to really combat that at scale is through data, more and more data. We've had some wins recently, for those of you that follow in the developed market space, with the GEMS database being daylighted recently, but there's more that needs to be done, and the more data we get in this space, the better those financial decisions and the better those investments are going to flow. So that data is really important. Project preparation. Thinking about, so the investors that I'm working with, as you know, particularly the pension funds, they're investing at scale. They're writing large check sizes. And the due diligence, they'll say, the due diligence I have to do for a small check is the same as I have to, for a large check. So they're going to be writing large checks. Their teams aren't huge. And so how do we work with both governments? How do we work to bundle projects, to think about how we can invest, how we can find projects that we can invest in at scale? The ILN has a great partnership we just launched at COP last year in Dubai with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, USTDA, to open up a project window for these asset owners to have that necessary project technical assistance to create projects that are investable at scale in particularly emerging and developed markets. So that's something that's really important. The third is de-risking capital. We talk about this a lot. Concessional capital. How do we incentivize investment into new markets? The role of concessional first loss, creative de-risking instruments are really, really important to get this capital in, to be the tip of the sword to get this capital in. And there's some really great projects. We are working really closely at ILN with the U.S. Treasury on this, as well as with the Rockefeller Foundation. Family offices. It's really interesting to see who can come into this capital stack to be catalytic to get large pools of capital into new markets, into new technologies at scale, because that's the role we need to play on this financial continuum. And then I would say, sort of the fourth, it would be around public-private partnerships. Really, how are we thinking about blended finance? How are we working with governments, and how are we advocating for good policy frameworks that make it easy, to be able to be in these markets? Honestly, the IRA, I was just in Toronto meeting with a number of these CEOs, and several of them said that they think that was the most significant piece of legislation in their lifetime. And what it shows is that incentives work. And so thinking about that and thinking about, how legislation works to really, meaningfully partner with private capital to get it to flow, again, at scale, not trickle, but to get it to flow at scale. That is what we're seeing. And with that, I would say, we're continually pushing within that, sort of bucket around public-private partnerships, is being creative, being innovative, and pushing for policy alignment at the federal level all the way down to the state level, and thinking about that. We're in conversations around, okay, great, capital is flowing into, I was talking to someone this morning, flowing into this market, but then permitting is stopping it dead in its tracks. And so how do we work? It's a tough problem to fix, but it's something that is, when we think about what are all the areas we need to come at this problem from every angle. If you can't come in the front door, come in the chimney, through the windows. We got to get to our solutions, and we got to be creative to do it. And I'm telling you, investors are ready and willing and wanting to think creatively, and again, be in rooms like this where they're hearing about what are the great ideas, how are they both seeded, how are they growing, how are you bringing in young voices, like the governor said. Let's get the best and brightest ideas here. We know this problem is not business as usual. We know that we've got to move faster than ever before, and we've got to move more energetically about it. And I'm telling you, investors are ready for this conversation.
I think you both made comments, and the previous speakers as well, that this isn't the climate crisis isn't a problem to mitigate. It's also an opportunity that can spur amazing growth, right? And that opportunity is exciting on many, many levels. So, Vivian, when you think about scaling investment too, right, from your perspective, from the central bank type of perspective, tell us about, how you think about it.
No, for sure. In Brazil, for example, in my perspective, what we see a lot of opportunities, because for clean energy, sun, wind energy, for biofuels, for food, for the agribusinesses, there are a lot of opportunities, carbon credits and so on. But what we understand also that to scale up, there is a role for all the different stakeholders, as you were giving some examples. But for example, in the governmental perspective, we are working in a sustainable taxonomy aligned with the international ones, a national sustainable taxonomy, to help on giving this clarification, to give this better view of what is sustainable, what is not, what should be incentivized, what shouldn't be incentivized. And this is a very technical discussion. We have a very strong governance around this. Yesterday, I was talking to Paraguay in a bilateral meeting, and they did a very good question. What about the pressures of the sectors that we lose with the discussion? Okay. I told them, I'm in your ass, and this is a topic of the elections. So yes, we will have pressures, but then we will have technical arguments and so on to try to guide to the direction we believe is the technically correct direction. But so taxonomy, it's a way. Also, the sovereign sustainable bonds, it's a way also for governments to try to help on getting resources to invest in these national projects at scale. For example, in Brazil, we just launched also a foreign exchange hedge for sustainable investments. So to try to de-risk, because it is a huge risk to invest in developing countries, isn't it? So also there are this kind of projects that it's impact national strategies also to try to collect, sum up impact projects also to give scale to the investments, to give a common governance, and to try to help on scaling up. So I think if we should, so in broad lines, I think to scale up, we have this role of the government, for example, in carbon markets, to regulate carbon markets, to give transparency. We have a role of the instruments, the sustainable instruments, the green bonds. We have a role for the transparency and the standards, like the International Sustainability Standard Boards, and the standardization of the metrics. We have a role for these partnerships, isn't it? When we have like the hubs, the startups working with universities and trying to increase the projects indeed. So we need projects to invest. So I think these kind of steps are the ones we need to go through to help on scaling up investments in this agenda.
Oh, that's great. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, we talk climate tech and we think about the technology sector, but this is a full economy, every sector opportunity, right? Climate tech really can impact every single sector of the economy. And I know, Amy, you are certainly with the pension funds that you work with and the investors you work with, there's a lot of interest in certain sectors right now, like agriculture, right? Yeah. But also with, Amy and I are both involved in the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which is also CEO-led network, but it really does have CEOs from many different sectors working collaboratively. So this is one space that I find really exciting because of the amount of collaboration that goes on between sectors, within sectors, to really try to make a difference. But maybe you could talk to some of the interests that you're seeing emerging, maybe in agriculture and some of the other sectors that you see that focus coming in.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interest across sectors. Agriculture being one that I think is really generating cross-sectoral collaboration and really trying to think about what's the innovation in this space. The opportunity for progress is enormous, and thinking about it. But I also wanted to pick up on your point on taxonomies. That's something we've done a lot of work on with ILN, and I think it's an area that's really important, is a bit of standardization about what good looks like.
Yes.
Regardless across the sectors. what sector you're looking at. You know, I remember at COP, I was facilitating a panel, and one of our members said, you know, if you've seen one transition plan, you've seen one transition plan, right? It's hard right now. It's hard to see what does good look like in a transition plan. How, and if you're in the business of investing in the transition, how do we create some level of standardization and sharing of best practices so as investors at scale we know what good looks like, and then we can be supportive of that in that space. So I think that's really important. I also just wanted to pick up and applaud you in the work you're doing specifically around currency risk.
Yes.
Currency risk is such an interesting and significant obstacle, a challenging obstacle for investment into emerging markets. And one of the things I often feel like when we talk about risk, and regardless of sector, when you think about risk and going into emerging markets, people treat risk as a monolith. Like all risk is risk. And it's just not true. Because from the, you know, we had a great occasion at the World Bank spring meetings in DC a couple months ago or a month ago to pull together the CIOs of our member organizations, so the chief investment officers, to really talk about this, you know, how do you see risk and what does risk look like? And what came out of that meeting was really that, you know, risk is different. There's maverick risk, there's currency risk, there's political risk, and all of those, there's, you know, and there's for sure bias within all these areas of risk. And so really trying to understand, there's reputational risk. How do you measure against that? How do you account for that? But currency is really the one that rises to the top most often. And so thinking creatively in the work you're doing, Brazil, on that is super, super innovative and interesting, and I think is going to push the needle on some more broader global thought on this at scale. But yes, I would say that, you know, the more, when I think about some of the sectors we're looking at, for sure, I mean, yes, agriculture, clean energy, again, the transition, that's a huge theme at ILN, is investing in the transition. And when we think about how to do that at scale, supply chain, so even in the new technologies, looking at, even when we have the best ideas, what is that going to look like over time? Is the supply chain there to make sure that those technologies can scale? And over time, that is something that we're in deep conversations about as well.
So I'm going to go a little off script and ask them both a question about what do you both hope to accomplish between now and COP30, which will be in Brazil a year from November. I would tell you that kind of there's a really big, I'd say, excitement and energy and run up to that COP. And, you know, I guess, Vivian, what do you really hope over the next year and a half we accomplish before that COP?
Yeah. No, I think we are in a very good momentum there. We can see, so every week you have a huge number of events happening, people from abroad. And it is on spot. So I think we have a very big window. We started this year with the G20 presidency, and will last until the end of the next year with the COP30. And so what we are feeling, and I hope that we can achieve, we are receiving pressures from IPDD, Tropical Forest Alliance, and so on, for example, tackle deforestation. And you start getting awareness and understanding that you can start building a win-win situation. Try to build agendas when you can not only say you or them, but you can try to explore alternatives in business when you can preserve and win with this. So, and also how to better monitor for the ones who won't really cope and understand that it is a common goal. So we are working, for example, in the Central Bank of Brazil with a Bureau of Rural Credit. It's integrating a lot of databases for better surveillance and to try to really make the legislation, the compliance with the legislation work. So this is already ongoing. So what we need to accomplish to finish this, to be able to deliver this, to have the sustainable taxonomy with a proper guidance for the transition. So which sectors need to move, and the investments that we need to do to move this agenda to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. So I think these are, so that we can really use this momentum to receive the proper investments and go forward with this agenda.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a lot I want to see by COP, but so, maybe I'd stop for a minute and just look back. My first COP was in Glasgow, so that was 3 years ago as the CEO of ILN, and what's been really amazing to me in looking from then to now, and Jess and I were in Dubai together, is just how engaged private finance is. I mean, that is, I say Glasgow, we had like maybe one member was sending a CEO or two, and now we can't keep up with the delegation requests on behalf of large institutional investors to be at the table and to want to co-create solutions at COP. That is a big win. Not to crowd out other voices, but to sort of build, lengthen the table for private finance to be there, to not, again, be at the end of the conversation, but to be there and say, this is what we need, how can we work, how do we create win-win solutions, really co-create. And I really think that what I'm hearing and the feeling I'm getting is that spirit is continuing into Baku and into Azerbaijan, where we'll be in November, and so I'm excited about that. Maybe two things that I would like to see. I'd like to see, continued progress on data. The data that's already, available, I'd like it to become more accessible and easier for investors to use and apply. So I'd like to see more progress on that. I'd like to see more innovation, and this is in the private capital mobilization blended finance front, between public and private investors around de-risking. I really think, I do think innovative de-risking mechanisms are the holy grail for us to unlock capital at scale in emerging markets. I just do, and it's what I hear, and we got to think differently about it, and we got to be creative about it, and we got to, again, it's not just government money and large institutional investors. I think there's a lot of other players into that capital stack that are interested, that we're already talking to. Again, whether that's family offices, whether that's sovereign wealth funds, really thinking about we all see the problem. We all need to work together to solve it, and we just need to think differently about how we do it. And there's an energy right now that I'm hoping by the time we get to Baku, we'll start to see some rewards from the conversations that are happening.
Oh, that's great. So this is this Climate Tech conference, the first of its kind. Hopefully we will absolutely have it next year. And this is where we can really, again, this is the impetus for so many possible investments in technology and for many of you to network and understand like who is doing what to really, in each sector, make a difference with technology to move us forward to that low carbon economy. But as we kind of close up our panel, and again, thank you so much for joining me today, I'm just going to ask both of you what, if you could give in a sentence or so, what you'd like people to take away from our conversation. So Amy, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about some of the technicalities of unlocking capital at scale, but maybe I'd like you to leave with, that I think trust is the currency of the kingdom here. And I think, one of our CEOs that I work with really closely often says this, if business moves at the speed of trust, that's, finance moves at the speed of trust. And how do you build trust? You build trust by doing things like we're doing today. You pull people in the room, you have conversations. These convenings matter, and pulling together different actors. And we need to build trust, not just between investees and investors. We need to build trust with our communities and with our governments, with our public actors, across the continuum. But I think we cannot underestimate the value of bringing people together and having conversations like these, at scale, to really change the narrative, because it's not going to change it's not going to just be one investment that changes it. It's going to be a movement, and that narrative is going to change by us, continuing to get together, have these conversations, have honest conversations about what all the sides need, and then really agree to be a co-creator for the solution and not just someone who continues to admire the problem.
Viviane?
Yeah. And linking to this important talk, I think my final words would be for us to find our space where we are really good in what we do, but we address what the world really needs and recognize us for the relevance of what we are doing. So I think we are discussing a problem that it's a common problem that we need to address. We are talking about opportunities of recognition for the ones who can solve these problems, that it's a very huge and complex problems. But the governor was saying yesterday that we are here to solve tough questions, and we are. So this is a tough question. We need to solve it together. And the G20 TechSprint is just waiting for the good ideas, okay? And there is an award of $25,000 per problem statement, a total award of $150,000. So just to help a little bit on the stimulus. Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much. Please join me in thanking our panel. We really appreciate your both coming such a far way to join us.
Thanks for having us.